"She's out cold," Vic Joseph shouts on commentary, his voice laced with shock. Then a chilling silence, the kind that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. A slow-motion replay fills the screen. Jacy Jayne's boot, perfectly aimed, connecting with the side of Gigi Dolin's jaw. This wasn't a miss, it wasn't an accident. This was a statement. It happened on the February 14th, 2023 edition of Ding Dong, Hello, and it wasn't just a moment. It was a detonation. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was the second a sisterhood shattered, a bond forged in fire and ambition, now broken with brutal force. One kick, and it felt like half the NXT locker room, maybe even a good chunk of the WWE universe, wrote Gigi Dolin off as nothing more than roadkill. They whispered she was just a henchwoman, a dye-job sidekick who'd vanish without Mandy Rose leading the parade. They said she was weak, dependent, a follower, never a leader. Boy, were they wrong. This isn't just the story of a wrestling feud. This is the raw, unvarnished truth of how one steel cage bloodbath didn't just rewrite a rivalry, it completely rewrote every single doubter's notebook, silencing the critics and proving that sometimes the quiet ones have the loudest roar. Let's rewind 18 months. Back to a time when NXT felt like it was painted in black and gold, but ruled by a very different, very toxic shade. Toxic Attraction wasn't just a faction. They were an ethos, running NXT like a biker gang decked out in designer ring gear. They were loud, they were brash, and they were utterly dominant. Mandy Rose, their undeniable leader, held the NXT Women's title for an astonishing 413 days. A reign that felt legendary, and right there, by her side, a fierce, inseparable duo, Gigi Dolin and Jacy Jayne. They weren't just tag team partners, they were co-conspirators, trading the NXT Women's Tag Team Championships twice, painting the division their own shade of chaotic. Remember Halloween Havoc 2021. After retaining their titles in a brutal match, they didn't just celebrate. They spray-painted the cage, leaving their mark, taunting the entire women's division. It was audacious, it was disrespectful, and it was undeniably captivating. Fans often found themselves hating the trio, their arrogance, their dominance, their sheer disregard for anyone else. But here's the thing, and it's a crucial detail. You absolutely couldn't look away. Why? Because the chemistry felt real. It wasn't manufactured, it was organic, almost primal. Gigi's wild, almost manic eyes and her signature orange hair perfectly complemented Jacy's smug, self-assured smirk. They were yin and yang, a perfect storm of chaos and confidence. Before she even stepped foot in a WWE ring, Gigi Dolin, then known on the independent circuit as Priscilla Kelly, already had a reputation. She was a force, known for her unique style and willingness to push boundaries. But when she signed with WWE in 2021, many underestimated her. Could this indie darling truly translate her raw talent to the polished, demanding world of WWE? Skepticism lingered. Yet in NXT, something shifted. Her transformation wasn't just about a name change, it was a complete metamorphosis. Her look became sharper, her physique more defined, and her wrestling style evolved, blending her independent grit with a newfound mainstream polish. This evolution allowed her to stand out, earning respect and cultivating a dedicated fanbase who saw beyond the initial perceptions. Behind the scenes, the Toxic Attraction brand was meticulously crafted. Backstage clips showed them planning sneak attacks with an almost telepathic understanding, finishing each other's sentences in interviews. They bragged about being ride or die, and for a significant period, it wasn't just talk. It was their reality. They trained together, pushed each other in the gym, shared victories, and even coordinated their ring gear down to the smallest detail. This wasn't just a faction, it was a lifestyle. Their bond was tight, their synergy undeniable. The formula they had concocted seemed bulletproof, an unbreakable force in NXT. Until, as these things often do, it wasn't. The first seismic tremor hit in November 2022. Mandy Rose, the undisputed queen of toxic attraction, the rock upon which their empire was built, shockingly dropped the NXT Women's title to Roxanne Perez. It was a moment that sent shockwaves through the NXT universe. But the real earthquake followed just 24 hours later. Mandy Rose was released from her WWE contract. Suddenly, the seemingly invincible faction felt like a band that had just lost its lead singer mid-tour. The air went out of the room, and the vibrant, chaotic energy that defined toxic attraction began to dissipate. NXT Creative, perhaps sensing the inevitable, then made another move. They split the NXT Women's Tag Team Championships. This left Gigi and JC, once reigning supreme, feeling adrift, directionless, and without the titles that had been their shared identity. The cracks began to show, subtle at first, then widening with each passing week. You could almost feel the static electricity building between them. Their once perfect synchronicity began to fray. They lost a #1 contenders bout on the January 31st show, a match where their communication seemed off, their timing just a beat behind. And then came the verbal fireworks. Post-match, JC, ever the aggressor, grabbed a microphone. Her words, dripping with thinly veiled contempt, were aimed squarely at Gigi. "You're not on my level anymore." The accusation hung heavy in the air, a poisoned dart thrown at the heart of their partnership. Gigi fired back, her eyes glossy, her voice cracking with a raw, undeniable emotion that transcended the usual wrestling promo. It was the first undeniable hint that this breakup wasn't just kayfabe. It was deeply personal, cutting to the bone. The crowd, ever perceptive, buzzed with an almost frenzied energy. They sensed real tension, genuine animosity bubbling to the surface. Online, the debates raged. Fans started polling. Who needs who more? The betting odds, surprisingly to some, began to favor JC. Why? Because the narrative that had been quietly building in the background suddenly exploded into the mainstream. Big-name critics on podcasts, the self-proclaimed experts, began to label Gigi a distant third wheel who just lucked into 2 tag reigns. The implication was clear. She was riding Mandy and JC's coattails. This narrative clung to her reputation like mud, threatening to define her. Gigi was facing not just a crumbling partnership, but a crisis of identity, both personally and professionally. The challenge wasn't just to beat JC. It was to prove that she was never just a passenger, but a driving force all along. Valentine's Week, a time for romance, for declarations of love. But in NXT, it was merely the backdrop for a brutal, unforgettable betrayal. The set of Ding Dong, Hello, was meticulously arranged for irony. A pink, heart-shaped coffee table, rose petals scattered artfully, and the saccharine strains of cheap romance music playing softly. It was a setup designed to lull you into a false sense of security, to make you believe, just for a moment, that reconciliation was possible. Gigi entered first, her demeanor almost apologetic, her body language conveying a desperate hope for a truce, for some semblance of their former bond. She looked vulnerable, open, ready to mend fences. Then JC Jane strutted out, a stark contrast in a black leather jacket, a predatory smirk playing on her lips. She looked like the big, bad wolf, ready to devour. The air crackled with unspoken tension. They traded barbs, sharp and cutting, each word a chip at the fragile facade of their relationship. The crowd, usually boisterous, was at a hush, leaning forward, sensing the impending storm. And then, boom, a super kick. It landed flush, with devastating precision. Gigi's head whipped back, her body crumpling to the mat. She lay motionless, a stark image of shattered trust and broken friendship. The gasp from the crowd was visceral, a collective intake of breath. But JC wasn't done. Oh no, not even close. With a chilling resolve, she grabbed a steel chair, unfolded it, and mercilessly folded it across Gigi's ribs. The sickening thud echoed through the arena. Jacy leaned in, her face contorted with fury and triumph, screaming, "You were always the weak link." It wasn't just a physical assault. It was a psychological dismantling. Medical staff rushed in, a flurry of concerned faces around Gigi's prone form. On Twitter, the wrestling world exploded. The immediate takes were brutal, definitive. Gigi's finished. She'll be future endeavored by summer. The cynicism was rampant. Inside the performance center, even some coaches, the very people who had helped shape her, privately wondered if Dolin could ever truly rebound from such a devastating, public implosion. The whispers were loud, the doubts persistent. It seemed for a moment that the critics had been right all along. Gigi Dolin, the supposed third wheel, was indeed broken. But you know how it is with true fighters. Sometimes the lowest points forge the strongest resolve. 2 weeks later, the wrestling world witnessed a different Gigi Dolin. Not the cocky faction member, not the dazed victim. This was Gigi, stripped bare, raw, and undeniably human. She sat alone on a steel chair in the empty Capitol Wrestling Center, crutches leaning silently beside her, a stark reminder of the physical cost of betrayal. There was no pyro, no booming crowd, no flashy entrance. Just a single, unblinking, hard camera focused on her. She didn't deliver a fiery threat or a declaration of war. Instead, she spoke. She spoke about growing up in a trailer park, about the struggles, the humility of her beginnings. She spoke about being the weird kid with orange Kool-Aid hair, an outcast, someone who always felt different, an outsider looking in. And then, her voice, though trembling, gained strength as she spoke about trusting Jacy, not just as a friend, but more than she had ever trusted her own blood family. The depth of that betrayal, the personal cost, was palpable. Her voice trembled, yes, but her eyes, those fierce, determined eyes, never wavered. "I wasn't just betrayed," she declared, the words hanging heavy in the air. "I was erased, and that won't happen again." It was a moment of profound vulnerability, a confession of past hurts and a powerful declaration of future defiance. And the fans leaned in. The usual snark and negativity that often plagues online wrestling communities began to shift. Comments under the YouTube clip, once filled with doubt, jumped from cynicism to genuine sympathy, then to outright admiration. This wasn't just a character on a screen. This was a person, hurting, but refusing to break. Her heathen shirt, a nod to her unique outsider persona, saw its sales spike by an incredible 42%. For the very first time, the NXT universe wasn't just seeing Gigi Dolin, the wrestler. They were seeing the person behind the gimmick, the resilient spirit underneath the orange hair and the tough exterior. This promo didn't just turn the tide of public opinion, it solidified Gigi Dolin as a compelling, relatable, and deeply human protagonist in her own story. It was the moment she stopped being just a part of a faction and started becoming a star in her own right. While Gigi was busy rebuilding her narrative brick by painful brick, Jacy, meanwhile, was embracing her role as the ultimate predator. She wasn't just content with a physical beatdown, she was determined to dismantle Gigi psychologically, to twist the knife at every opportunity. On the March 7th show, Jacy took her villainy to a new, truly despicable level. She spotted Gigi's little brother in the front row, a young, innocent face in a sea of wrestling fans, and without a moment's hesitation she taunted him, telling the kid with a venomous sneer, "Your sister's a failure." Now, some might call that cheap heat, a low blow designed purely to elicit a negative reaction. And yes, it was. But it worked. Oh, how it worked. The arena microphones caught the sound of the young boy yelling back, tears streaming down his face, his small voice filled with a desperate defense of his sister. It was a raw, unfiltered moment that transcended the usual theatrics of wrestling. The video of this exchange racked up an astounding 1.3 million views in just 48 hours, spreading like wildfire across social media. This wasn't just a wrestling feud anymore. It had crossed a line. It now had stakes that felt borderline illegal, deeply personal, and incredibly painful. JC's action cemented her as the most hated woman in NXT, and in doing so, inadvertently poured rocket fuel on Gigi's burgeoning comeback story. The feud was no longer about titles or bragging rights. It was about family, honor, and the absolute need for retribution. With the emotional stakes now impossibly high, the feud between Gigi Dolin and JC Jane escalated from a simmering rivalry into an all-out war. It wasn't confined to the ring anymore. They brawled in a gritty, chaotic parking lot vignette, a scene ripped straight from a street fight. Gigi's ribs were still taped, a visible testament to JC's earlier brutality, but her eyes burned with an unyielding fire. JC, meanwhile, emerged with a bloodied nose, a taste of her own medicine. Security guards struggled, straining every muscle, but they simply couldn't pull these two apart. The animosity was too intense, too personal. It was clear. These women weren't just fighting for a win. They were fighting for their very souls. NXT management, recognizing the white-hot intensity of the rivalry and the undeniable demand from the fans, sanctioned a series of matches to settle the score. First, a singles match. Gigi, still recovering, still underestimated, managed to snatch a victory via a quick, gritty roll-up. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't dominant, but it was a win that showed her resilience, her ability to seize an opportunity even when she wasn't at 100%. It was a gut-check victory, proving she could win when it mattered. Then came the street fight, a brutal, anything-goes affair. JC, ever the opportunist, pulled brass knucks from her boot, using a hidden weapon to secure a victory. It was cheap, it was dirty, but it evened the score. Dead, even at 1-1, the tension was unbearable. The fans, ravenous for a definitive conclusion, began to demand a gimmick match, a stipulation where there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. They wanted blood. They wanted a definitive end. And NXT delivered. The legendary Shawn Michaels himself, the architect of many iconic gimmick matches, stepped forward to announce something truly groundbreaking: the first-ever women's weaponized steel cage match. This wasn't just any cage match. It was designed for maximum destruction. Chairs were bolted to the wall, kendo sticks hung from the top like macabre wind chimes, and there were no escape rules. Victory could only come via pinfall or submission. The date was set: May 30th, 2023. This wasn't just a match. It was to be the final, brutal chapter in a saga of betrayal and redemption. The stage was set for Gigi Dolin to either rise from the ashes or be consumed by the flames. The night of May 30th, 2023. The arena lights bled crimson, casting an ominous glow as the steel cage, a monument to brutality, slowly descended, encasing the ring. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, a palpable sense of dread and excitement. Both women made their entrances, not just with their usual gear, but with crimson war paint streaked across their faces, Gigi's across her eyes, a symbol of defiance, JC's on her cheekbones, a mark of aggression. It was clear. They weren't just competitors tonight, they were warriors. The bell rang, not as a signal for a technical wrestling display, but as a declaration of war. There were no polite wrist locks, no feeling-out process. From the very first second, they threw fists, raw, unadulterated strikes fueled by months of animosity. Within 3 minutes, the steel steps were introduced, a blunt instrument of pain. Gigi's back slammed onto the unforgiving edge, a sickening thud that made the crowd wince. The match quickly devolved into a symphony of destruction. Gigi, fueled by pure adrenaline, scaled the cage wall and launched herself backward in a terrifying moonsault onto a trash can lid placed over JC's torso. JC, never to be outdone in cruelty, retaliated with a vicious suplex, driving Gigi onto an open steel chair that buckled under the impact. They climbed halfway up the fence, trading slaps high above the canvas, when JC ripped a kendo stick from the cage wall. She brought it down with a sickening crack across Gigi's knee. The crowd, a collective voice of concern, chanted, "Please don't tap," begging Gigi to endure. But Gigi Dolin, the weak link, refused the easy way out. Her eyes, despite the pain, remained fierce. She countered with a desperate tornado DDT, driving Jacy headfirst onto that same kendo stick. The momentum, slowly but surely, began to swing. The turning point had arrived. The finish was as brutal as it was poetic. Gigi, summoning every ounce of strength, lawn-darted Jacy through a table wedged in the corner. Then, with Jacy stunned and broken, Gigi locked in a rear-naked choke, using the kendo stick across Jacy's throat to amplify the pressure. Jacy struggled, clawing desperately, until finally, with a defeated gasp, she tapped out. The referee called for the bell at 17:42. The cage slowly lifted. Gigi collapsed to her knees, blood smeared across her face, but her arms, though trembling, were raised in triumph. She had survived. She had conquered. The commentary team, their voices hoarse, put Gigi over huge. "Gigi Dolin just graduated," Vic Joseph roared, "from afterthought to assassin." Booker T added, "She didn't just win, she dominated when it mattered most." Social metrics, the digital pulse of the wrestling world, exploded. Gigi proved You Wrong wasn't just trending. It was a global phenomenon, a testament to the raw emotion and undeniable narrative that had unfolded. Post-show media polls, the definitive measure of fan sentiment, revealed a seismic shift. A staggering 78% of voters now declared that they saw Gigi Dolin as a future champion, a legitimate main event player. Even Jacy Jayne, her face still etched with the pain of defeat, offered a surprising, begrudging respect on Twitter. She was the better demon tonight. It was a rare acknowledgement from her bitter rival, a nod to Gigi's undeniable performance. In the weeks that followed, Gigi Dolin emerged not just victorious, but transformed. She debuted new gear, sleek black leather with striking orange stitching, a visual representation of her evolution from Toxic Attraction's colorful henchwoman to her own fierce, independent warrior. She didn't rest on her laurels. She continued to prove her worth, scoring back-to-back decisive wins over formidable opponents like Thea Hale and Indy Hartwell. The betting odds, once stacked against her, shifted dramatically, now pegging her as next in line for the coveted NXT Women's title, and those same critics who had buried her, who had dismissed her as a third wheel, were forced to eat crow on their podcasts, admitting, with a collective mea culpa, that she was undeniably a franchise player. Gigi Dolin hadn't just won a match. She had won her career back, silencing every single doubter with the most brutal, beautiful proof imaginable. If this story of betrayal and triumph fired you up and reminded you why we loved this crazy world of wrestling, then smash that like button. Seriously, hit it hard, so YouTube knows to show this to the next fan who still thinks Gigi was just background noise. And drop a comment below. Did that weaponized steel cage match change your mind? Or were you Team Dolin all along, seeing the fire in her eyes even when others couldn't? Don't forget to hit subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that truly make wrestling matter, the stories that transcend the ring and resonate with all of us. From a tag team henchwoman, dismissed and underestimated, to a steel cage survivor, forged in the fires of betrayal, Gigi Dolin turned one brutal, heartbreaking moment into a masterclass on perseverance, resilience, and self-belief. She didn't just beat Jacy Jayne. She didn't just win a wrestling match. She body-slammed every single doubter's narrative, every whispered criticism, every cynical prediction right into the unforgiving canvas. The moment she locked in that rear-naked choke with the kendo stick, the moment Jacy Jayne tapped out, Gigi wasn't just closing a chapter on a toxic friendship. She was authoring a brand new one, with her own name boldly emblazoned on the cover, a chapter titled Main Event Star. And if history, particularly the history of professional wrestling, teaches us anything at all, it's this: Never, ever write off the orange-haired kid who's not only willing to bleed for her dreams, but is ready to prove every single one of you wrong.